Good day, students. I welcome you to JSS1 School International. This physics class, and this class is for JSS1 students. And our topic for this week is what? Friction. So just a quick recap of what we discussed last time. Last week we looked at what force, and we found out that force is not just the push or pull upon an object. It is what? The push or pull upon an object resulting from what? The interaction was between what? That object. And we went further to differentiate force between into two. We have contact force and we have what? Non-contact force. Contact force, as the name implies, has to do with what? Contact with what? With something. Either contact with an object or contact with what? With two or more bodies. So, and for non-contact force, we have what? It occurs on its own. Example of it, we have gravitational force, we have electric force, and we have what? Magnetic force. So this week we're going to be looking at what? Friction. So friction is an example of what? Of contact force, right? It's part of the examples we listed in contact force last week. So now this week we're going to be picking what? Friction, and we'll be dealing it as a what? As a topic on its own. So like what we have been saying since last week, we say friction is what? Is an opposing what? Force. So you just like this hand is trying to pull this object towards the right, and there's a friction between the bottom of this object and and the floor. So you can see it here that it is not it is not smooth. Both at the bottom of the object, okay, is rough, and also the surface of the floor is also rough. So for you to be able to push this freely, you have to apply a force that is greater than the frictional force. So let's see our specific objective for this class. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to define friction. You're going to study the types of friction we have with examples. I'm going to be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of friction. Okay, if friction is good to us or if friction is harmful to us. So we're going to be seeing some of them. I'm going to state method of reducing friction. Of course, you can't get rid of it, but we can minimize it. So let's start the class. So what is friction? Friction is a force that opposes the motion of an object between two surfaces. Okay, so it is a force that acts between the surface and the object. So just like I said here, you're trying to apply a force to push this box, okay, towards the right. That's where you intend to move it, and frictional force is opposing the motion towards the left. So friction always works in direction opposite to the direction of the object you are trying to move. So here I have this is my applied force, which is Fa. We discussed this last week. It's also type of contact force, right? So this is my applied force moving towards the right, okay, and the frictional force is opposing it because I'm moving my object in a rough surface, and also the bottom of my object is also rough. That's why it is very difficult for me to move this freely. So just like this guy riding his bike, so it's riding it has to overcome a force that's greater than the frictional force for him to move this car his bike freely. All right, so we see more examples on friction. This is a tire, this is when you're riding a bike, this is a car swimming. So everything we see in our daily life has to do with friction. So friction refers to all force that has to reduce the motion of the object that is in contact with. So anything you're in contact with is called matter. So it might not really be an object, okay? It might be liquid, it might be just like this cup is moving on the surface of the water, okay? So it has to overcome a higher force than the frictional force for him to be able to move freely. So that's why we generalize it to matter. So it's a force that reduces the motion between an object and the matter in contact with each other. And friction often transforms energy of motion into thermal energy. Okay, so we're going to be looking at types of friction. We're looking at advantages, disadvantages of friction, and all that. So far we've achieved our first objective. So let's look at types of friction. So basically speaking, we have just two types of friction. We have static friction and dynamic friction. Dynamic friction is what we refer to as kinetic friction. So but in your level, I'm going to break dynamic friction, or rather kinetic friction, into two. We have more of them. So I'm going to call it sliding friction and rolling friction. So meaning that in this class we're going to be looking at what 3 types of friction. When you get to senior secondary school, you're going to be hearing that you just have 2 types of friction, that is static friction and what dynamic friction. But in your level, I'm going to what break the dynamic friction into 2 parts. We have more of them, okay, but in this class we're going to be looking at what just 2 types of kinetic friction. So basically, we have static friction when an object is in motion, it is not moving. And we found that in our last class, despite an object is in motion, there is a force acting on it. Can you remember the force? We have the gravitational force and what, and the normal force. Okay, there are 2 forces acting on that object, despite it is what, it is in motion. Okay, so here we have what, sliding what, friction. So in sliding friction, the object is what, sliding over what, over the surface, and of course there's a friction opposing what, opposing that motion. And we have lowering friction, the object is lowering on what, on the surface. So we're going to look at them one after the other, and we're going to see examples of them. So before then, I also always say that friction is what, is a force, and since it's a force, it has the same Newton, it has the same unit as what, as force. So since the unit of force is in Newton, we can also confidently say that the unit of frictional force is also what, in Newton. Okay, so static force is a type of force that keeps an object at rest. It prevents that object in motion from moving. Okay, and sliding friction is a force that resists what, the motion of what, of an object moving across what, across a surface. And rolling friction is a friction exerted when an object is what, is rolling over what, over a surface. So let's look at example of each of them. So like since I said, in static friction, it occurs when the surface in contact is at rest. The surface is not, the object at the surface is not what, is not moving. Example here, I have a ball resting on the pitch. I have a book on the desk. I believe your book right now is on the desk if you are not touching it. Okay, so if it's on the desk, that what is applying is what, static friction. And we have what, a plotted plant sitting on what, on a sidewalk. So these are examples of what, static friction. Okay, so let's look at what sliding friction is. A friction that occurs when solid surfaces slide over what, one another. Okay, like you're combing your hair. Okay, so your hair is in contact with what, with the strand of your hair. So you have to apply a very high force greater than that of the strand of your hair for your head, for the strand of your hair to be able to come out easily. So you're combing your hair, you have to apply a force greater than the frictional force for your hair to come out easily. So at that side, at that point, what is occurring is what, is sliding friction. Okay, and I have here also, you're writing a pen, writing with your pen. So your pen and the book is what is also called what, a sliding what, a friction. So these are few examples on what, on sliding friction. This is a hockey game, and they are playing, of course they are what, in hockey game you always what, slide. Okay, because the surface is not smooth. Okay, most times they play it on what, on a snow surface. Okay, so this what's occurring here is what, is sliding what, friction. So these are few examples of what, of sliding friction, but just know that it's a friction that occurs when a surface slides over what, another surface. Okay, you're writing with your pen and you're sliding, so it is like, this is what, sliding what, friction. So let's look at what, a rolling friction. It's a friction that occurs between what, surface in motion, in which one surface is that a ball or what, or a roller or a wheel. Like your daddy's car or your mommy's car, the wheel is what, is a rolling friction. Okay, you're rolling a ball on the surface, that what is occurring is what, a rolling friction. You're riding your bike, the wheel of your tire or your bike is what, a rolling friction. Okay, you're playing a bowling game. When you roll the ball, what is occurring is what, is a rolling friction. So all these are what, examples of what, rolling friction. So I would like you to give me your own example. So please and please, if I give you an assignment, try not to copy my example. I want you to think out of the box and give me more examples so that I can learn from your examples too. So basically we've achieved our second objective. We've looked at what types of friction, we've looked at what sliding friction, static friction, and what, and rolling friction, with what, 2 or 3 examples. Okay, let's look at factors that affect what, friction. Basically speaking, we have 2 types of factors that affect what, that friction depends upon. The first one is the surface in contact. Which surface are you pushing your object to? Which surface is your object resting on? That's what you consider. What kind of surface are you rolling your object onto? What surface are you sliding on? So all this is the main factors you have to look at when you're considering what friction. For friction should be able to occur, you have to consider, is the surface smooth or is the surface rough? Now here I have a smooth surface, and I'm rolling my object towards the smooth surface. So my object will roll faster because the friction in the smooth surface is less. But if I'm rolling my object on a rough surface, it will get to a point and it will stop. It will be moving very sluggishly because the surface is rough. Example of a rough surface is like a rug. If you have a rug and you want to roll a ball in a rug, it will be very difficult for the ball to move because there is friction between the ball and the surface. But if you have a tie, okay, of course there is friction because the tie in the room might not be completely tied. Okay, you might have some line that is curved, you have another one that will join a tie, so those spaces is friction. So but there's little friction that will occur than that of the rug. So if you roll your ball on a tie, it will be very easy for your ball to roll easily. And if you roll it on a rug, it will be very difficult for your ball to roll easily. So you have to apply a very greater force for the ball to be able to move on the rug surface. So that's one of the major factors in which friction depends upon the nature of the surface. You have to consider, is my surface a smooth surface or is it a rough surface? And again, the second factor is how hard the surface pressed together. Okay, how hard they press together. If they press together very hard, it will be very difficult for the object to move. But if it's just lying on the surface, of course it has to be a smooth surface, right? The object will move freely. So yeah, in conclusion, let's agree now that friction is less on a smooth surface and friction is more on a rough surface. So these are the two major factors in which friction depends upon: the nature of the surface and how hard the surface pressed together. And for a smooth surface, friction is less, and for a rough surface like your rug or carpet, friction is more. So are there things that friction helps us to do? Is friction useful in our daily life? We're going to see that as we journey through. But before then, let's look at the cause of friction. Friction is caused due to the interlocking of irregularity between two surfaces in contact. When two surfaces are in contact together, okay, it depends on how smooth the surface is or how rough the surface is. For a smooth surface, we have a very little irregularity between two surfaces. Like this surface here I have, this is a very rough surface. So you can see the interlocking between these two surfaces. They are not smooth, okay? They are not smooth. It is very rough. So this is what I mean by irregularity. So they are not equal. They are not balanced, okay? So for a smooth surface, we have minute a very little irregularity between two surfaces, and for a rough surface, we have a large irregularity between them. So we can say that force of friction is small if the surface is rough, just like I said earlier. So in general, if you're asked what is the cause of friction, you just simply say friction is caused by the interlocking of irregularity between two surfaces. Or you can rather say friction is the irregularity that occurs between two surfaces in contact. That's just one line, you've said it. Okay. Advantage of friction. Now, we've all been saying friction opposes motion, is slow down motion, but friction is very good and very important in our daily life. So we're going to be seeing few examples or few ways why we embrace friction. Despite it opposes motion, we have to give a thumbs up to friction, because without friction we cannot be able to walk freely. So the friction between our foot and the ground enable us to walk freely on the surface of the floor. So if there were not friction between the foot and the floor, we're going to be sleepy. we're going to be sliding down. If we are walking, we're going to be sliding down. If we are running, we're going to be sliding down. So because there is friction between what? Between the floor and what? And our foot, okay, our feet, it enables us what? To work. It enables us what? To run. It enables us what? To jump. So if there is no friction, imagine you are walking on what? On a very tight surface, maybe like a snow surface that is really snowing. You can see that they don't just walk it freely without what? Well, just like that on a bare foot. You have to use what? A support to be able to use what? To walk. Okay, so it's because of friction between our feet and the ground that enable us what? To walk freely. So you can see that friction is very important. If just this advantage, that means we have to embrace friction, because without friction we cannot be able to walk freely. Of course, the foot of our shoe and the ground is a rough surface, and that's why we can be able to walk freely. So let's see another advantage. It is very possible for us to write because of what? Friction between our pen and the paper. If there's no friction between the pen and the paper, of course we cannot be able to write freely. So you see one of the advantage of friction. And likewise, a teacher writing on the board, because of the friction between the chalk and the blackboard, enable the teacher to write freely on the board. And we have our tire, we have our automobile. The friction between the tire and the road helps automobile to move freely on the road. So our tire, of course, tire is a rough surface, and the road is also a rough surface. So because of this friction, it enables the car to move. Okay, so you see, friction is very important in our everyday life. So it also helps us to hold objects together. Like if you want to drink water now, you hold your tumbler, because there's a friction between your hand and the tumbler. Of course, it's not smooth. Your hand and the tumbler is not smooth. Okay, it's a rough surface. So but because of that, you're able to take that water. So despite it's a rough surface, or despite its opposed motion, friction is very, very important in our daily life. So we have to embrace friction. Okay, and we can notice that even the disadvantages of friction is just that it opposes motion, but then we can overcome it. Okay, we can overcome it. So let's look at few examples on disadvantages of friction. So friction causes wear in our shoes. Okay, so the sole of our shoes wear out due to friction. And this is something that we can't control. That's the truth. So you just have to be mindful where you're wearing your shoe to. Just like I want to go and play football, and I'm coming and wear cover shoe. Of course, you know that your shoe is going to wear out, because you're not putting the right shoe. Or it's rain, or it's a raining day, and I have to wear a shoe that has a sole heel. Okay, I'm not going to wear a flat shoe, because it's going to spoil the shoe. So the fact that friction wears the sole of our shoes is caused by us, right? Most at times, either we are not wearing the shoe very well, or we are not taking care of our shoes, or we are wearing our shoes on wrong occasions. So there are different shoes for different occasions. So with this first disadvantage, we can prevent it. Okay, so let's see second example. The tire of our bicycle and our car gets wear out due to friction. Of course, we can also prevent it. When you keep an object or your goods for a very long period of time, of course it's going to get worn out, and that's due to friction. Like if you leave your car for a very long time, you travel over like 2 or 3 months, you find out that when you come back, the tire of the car is getting wear out. So this is caused by by friction. But if it's something that you're using often, of course you are maintaining it, so it will not get wear out. So this also, we can also prevent it. And also the staircase and the foot over bridge in our railway station also get wear out due to friction. Our knives or razor lose their sharp head due to friction. So when you are cutting your vegetable, or you're cutting your fruit or your salad, you find that at the point you say this knife is no longer sharp anymore. It's because you've made use of it. Because if you are using it consequently, of course you know that the sharpness of the knife will reduce. And again, if you put your knife inside water, okay, if you leave it soak inside water, the sharp of the knife will reduce. So all this is something we can overcome, and we can also prevent. So now you can agree with me that the advantages of friction is more, it supersedes that of the disadvantages of friction. Because despite, even if we have 10,000 disadvantages of friction, despite the fact that friction enables us to work, it overcomes all the disadvantages of friction. Okay, all right, so that's our third objective: advantages and disadvantages of friction. So are there ways we can reduce this friction? Yes. We cannot completely get rid of friction, but we can reduce it. Okay, now friction is reduced by placing a ball bearing between a shelf and the outer layer. So I have a shelf and the outer layer. You can see that this place, it will get rust easily. Okay, now for me to prevent this shelf from getting rust, I have to put what is called a ball bearing. So in that case, this can be able to rotate freely. Okay, so ways for me to reduce friction: the first one is by making use of lubricant. Now let's say you're finding it difficult to open the padlock of your door. Okay, so the first thing that will come to your head is, what if I apply oil to the padlock and the key, or you apply grease? So the friction between the padlock will reduce, because you've applied a lubricant. So a lubricant is either a powder, oil, or grease. So it helps to reduce friction. Like I said earlier, you can't get rid of friction, but we can minimize it. And using a roller or a wheel, this wheel here that is attached to our car, also helps us to reduce friction in our moving vehicles. And ball bearing, just as we saw, it helps us. It is used in vehicles and bicycles to also reduce friction. So basically here we have ways of reducing friction. The first one is by making use of lubricant. The second one is by making use of wheel in our vehicles, and the other one is by making use of ball bearing. Ball bearing is used in our ceiling fan, it's used in our bicycle, it's used in our automobile. Okay, so that's all for today. This is our last objective. So just a quick recap of what we've achieved today. We've talked about friction, which is a type of force, and the force is a contact force. It's a force that opposes motion upon an object, and its unit is in Newton. And we went further to see three types of friction. We have static friction, we have sliding friction, and we have rolling friction. And we find out that the cause of friction is due to the interlock between two surfaces in contact. And we agree that in smooth surface friction is less, and in rough surface friction is more. And we find out that without friction between the floor and the foot, we cannot be able to work. And without friction between our hand and our tumbler, we cannot be able to drink water. So friction is important in our day-to-day life, everyday life. And the advantage of friction is wear out our object, it wear out our shoes, it wear out our goods, okay, if kept for a very long time. And also reduce the sharp edge of our knife or our cutting utensils. Okay, and we've noticed that we can't get rid of friction, but we can reduce it. And ways of reducing friction is by making use of lubricants, or making use of ball bearing. So that's all for this class. So try to go to the video 2 or 3 times for better understanding. And if you have any question, please put it in your Google Classroom. Here is the code in your Google Classroom. And again, I will still want to plead with you guys, please and please, don't put your assignment like a chat. You putting it as a chat, everybody is seeing it. Okay, try to send it privately to me. So in that way, I will be the only one that will get access to your assignment. So if you put it in a general chatting room, it's a possibility that someone may just sit and pick your answer and write the same thing. So if you put it there, I'm not going to mark it. I'm going to mark it if it's sent to me privately. So try to go through this video 2 or 3 times again, and if you have any question, put it down in the Google Classroom. I'll be happy to give you a response. All right, bye for now and have a nice day.